So we're joined today by Greg Dworkin, one of the contributing editors of Daily Kos. Thank you very much for sitting down with us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about the panel you were on yesterday.
Well, yesterday we had a science panel, something we try to do every year, organized by a terrific contributor, and thankfully you guys have done a lot of taping, so people will be able to see clips of the panel over the next few days as we post them on Daily Kos.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about what did you come to it with? What were you trying to get out of it for people?
Well, the whole group really wanted to talk about issues of science, and right now a little bit of what you might call science resistance from the public. My topic happened to be vaccines. We can talk about that in a bit, but we also talked about creationism and the pushback against intelligent design, and we talked about global warming and global warming deniers. And all of that has to do not just with reaction from various and sundry media figures and those who have a stake on pushing the other side of the argument. It also has a little bit to do with the public and public education and what they get out of these discussions and what they understand, as well as the media in terms of treating a settled argument like global warming as if it's a he said, she said debate, when in fact it's not.
Right. And now, as an example, you mentioned earlier a disease out in California. I'm not going to try to repronounce the name because I'm sure I would mess it up. But can you use that as an example and explain a little bit of what you were talking about, this resistance to vaccines?
Sure. One of the topics that I was talking about is a recent pandemic and the pandemic vaccine, and when it came out, how people reacted. A lot of people thought it was new and didn't want it and settled for last year's seasonal flu vaccine, even though seasonal flu isn't what was around. They didn't like that when it was available, but now that the pandemic came and the so-called new vaccine came, they were happier with the older one. And it's kind of funny because it's all the same vaccine. You just take out last year's flu and you put in this year's flu. Well, now in California, there's a totally separate illness called pertussis, better known as whooping cough. And there's been about 1,500 cases. It's the worst outbreak in California over the last 50 years. 6 infants have died. And part of the reason that it's spreading is resistance to vaccines in places where really that shouldn't be, like Marin County, where it isn't an issue of access to medication or lack of insurance. And so the resistance to getting vaccinated, pushed by a lot of people in Hollywood, is really hurting California.
Yeah, no, and it seems like this is an issue that you seem to care a good amount about. Why is it that this issue, what does it mean to you personally?
Well, first of all, I'm a pediatrician, and so pediatric practice is all about prevention, and vaccination is something that we do. It's in our blood, if you will. Little kids are supposed to get shots at 2 months, 4 months, 6 months of age, 18 months. If they do that and get the proper boosters, then they're properly protected against diseases that kill them, like bacterial meningitis, which we hardly see anymore compared to what we used to. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have the vaccine. And I'm old enough to remember getting measles as a kid and mumps as a kid. I'm old enough to remember older siblings and friends of siblings who had polio when they were younger. In fact, one of my infectious disease teachers was an expert in how to use an iron lung, which is something they had to do quite a bit of in the 1950s. So from a professional point of view, this is something that I deal with literally every day, and I'm always having discussions with families and parents about why vaccines are important. Well, I also happen to be interested in pandemic preparedness and trying to prevent rather than fix things after they happen. And these tools are available. They're here, they work, we know what to do. And so it's very distressing to see literally modern tools of science rejected, sometimes for inappropriate reasons. And as a result, people get sick and sometimes they die. Not a great thing, and something I feel fairly passionate about.
Yeah, no, and as far as where this resistance comes from, I feel like a lot of people think it can be impossible to talk to someone who thinks vaccines are going to kill. Do you find people that are worried about vaccines or receptive when someone like yourself, a pediatrician, tells them the facts about it?
Yes, for the most part. I think that it's important to look at all information from the point of view of who's the messenger. Let's just take a quick example. Whether you're talking about the Bush years or whether you're talking about the Obama years, I think it's fair to say, and I think people understand, it's not a given that just because the government says something that everybody therefore agrees. CDC, Center for Disease Control, which I have worked with on various projects, is the most trusted name in public health. But most trusted name means 65, 70%. That means 30% don't necessarily follow just because CDC says so. If your own pediatrician, your own family doctor, your own relatives, your own friends has this discussion with you, it actually carries as much or more import than those who are experts but far away. I'm not a credentialist. I am a blogger. I totally understand the idea that what you say has a lot to do with who your sources are, and just because you have MD after your name doesn't make you always right. In fact, I'm a full supporter of the idea that it's really the facts and your links that make you credible, not the letters after your name. Nonetheless, I do think that when people like Glenn Beck or Bill Maher start talking about why vaccines are bad, I don't know that they have the total picture. The University of Google education that they've gotten doesn't necessarily match the scientific data, the literature, and the CDC information, links that are readily available to the public. And so delivering that, I think, is really an important task, and it falls as a blogger to something that I think it's appropriate for me to do, and as a pediatrician in my own practice for something for me to do.
Okay, and a large base of our viewers are grassroots activists.
Yes.
So I always like to ask, what can people watching at home do right now to get involved in this issue?
Support your local public health official. Public health folks are usually invisible unless something bad happens, like a pandemic, and then all of a sudden you get to see CDC on TV all the time talking about what things need to happen. They like it that way. They prefer to be invisible. They prefer not to have outbreaks. But when outbreaks do happen and advice is given to the public, it ought to be seriously considered and, followed. Right now, for example, officials in California are going to discuss with the public the idea of getting adults and pregnant women vaccinated so they don't give whooping cough to little kids. It's going to be a mass vaccination program different than what's normal and usual. Should it happen, should you get the vaccine, pay attention to what the public health folks are saying and give it careful consideration, listen to the reasoning, and of course make your own decision, but don't just blow it off because it's the vaccine companies trying to make a lot of money. It's really a whole lot more than that.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today.
Oh, my pleasure.